First off, we'd like to thank y'all for being here. It's a tremendous opportunity to learn and hear from y'all. So with that, let's get started. And this question's for all of y'all. What is the outlook for the power needs in the Permian Basin over the next decade, and how much has that outlook changed over the past few years?
Yeah, so obviously, as the Permian has grown through the shale revolution, the power needs have grown with it. And if you look back over the last 5 years, power consumption within the basin itself has increased by about 90%. So today we're roughly 7.5 gigawatts of power used. And you know, I think that's going to continue. If you look at April of 25 versus April of 24, you're about 10 to 15% higher on consumption year over year. And as you look forward, you know, in the Permian Basin, we're drilling roughly 5,000 wells a year. Diamondback is about 10% of that, or 500. And as you put these wells online and you look to electrify the basin, you're requiring additional power. So, you know, when you think about 5,000 wells a year over the next 5 years, 25,000 new wells that are gonna need electricity. Not to mention, you know, what Harrison talked about in his, in the previous discussion as it relates to data centers potentially coming into the basin as well. So all that being said, I expect, you know, another 10 to 15% as we move into 2026. And then, you know, I could easily see that 7.5 moving to, you know, 14 or 15 as we enter the 2030s. So a lot of demand.
I've got some stats on that from ERCOT's perspective, and you know, these are all, things are moving so quickly, nobody really knows exactly what, you know, where the demand's, what the demand's gonna be, but just to put in perspective the type of growth that we are anticipating, in 2021, ERCOT did a study projecting Permian demand, and it was 10 for the year 2030. So, you know, 5 years in the future. The projected demand was 10 gigawatts. And then 2021, we did a different study, and the projected demand in 2030 was 17.5. And then in July of last year, we did a Permian Basin reliability study, and the projected demand for 2030 is 23.5 gigawatts. That's a 124% increase from 2021 to 2024 in the projection. It's just massive. That would put the Permian Basin load, generation load, or electricity load, the size of the ERCOT Gulf Coast region, which includes Houston, Galveston, and Victoria. So it's just massive growth.
Yeah, and I think I would just touch on a few things related to the applications. Just some quick background on our company. We've been providing electric power to producers and midstream companies in the Permian Basin since 2014, and got into this business because, frankly, this is a marketplace that has experienced, to all these statistics, very significant load growth. And when we see really rapid load growth, just like we've seen in the Permian, the traditional grid, the utilities really struggle to keep up because it takes time to put in permanent power, right? And some of the newer trends that we're seeing in the marketplace today for electrification are, relate to things, some that we've been doing for a while: electric submersible pumps, saltwater disposal wells, midstream pumping stations. But what's actually happening now is we're seeing a lot of conversions of traditionally gas-fired compression to electric compression, and that's a huge needle mover for demand for electricity in the Permian. We're also seeing big trends around the electrification of frac fleets and the electrification of rigs, all of which are very large power consumers. Just to put it into context, one hydraulic fracturing unit, pressure pumping crew, it's around 20 to 30 megawatts of power for one. And so, there are situations where you can get that power off the grid, but there's also, situations where you can make that power on site. And companies like us, we specialize in making that power on site, but there are massive tailwinds around growth for power in the Permian. And it's, kind of like Jeff Bezos said, right? Electricity is a wonderful thing. It's a good place to invest because it touches everything. It's kind of like the internet, right? In the oil field, it touches everything. And that's really what's driving some of this compounding effect and demand for growth out there.
data center market is moving towards the Permian Basin. We used to build campuses that were, 10 to 30 megawatts, and that's when we consumed about 2 to 30 kilowatts in a rack. The project in Abilene we're doing is consuming about 126 kilowatts in a rack, and the projects we're looking at are now focusing on being able to be engineered up to 600 kilowatts in a rack. So what that means is the big hyperscalers that we work with are not looking at any projects that can't ultimately deliver a minimum of a gigawatt. So while the Permian Basin has not historically been a place to put data centers, and the reason why is because we've always been a very low latency. We have to be near the eyeball. So right now, there's about 300 data centers in Texas. About half of those are in Dallas. It consumes about a gigawatt. That is all public cloud and all the things you do on your phones. It requires low latency. As now we have a new secular demand around AI, we're able to look at places like Abilene or further west where we have access to cheap power, and they are not latency sensitive applications. So we're looking to put massive, basically compute farms where we can do them in an efficient way. And the Permian Basin looks to be very attractive. When we look at the demand, it's really hard for us to project what that means. There's been 2 gigawatt deals done in the United States. One up in Reno, the other is Abilene. People talk about this all the time. There's only been 2 ever executed. We're going to start seeing that happen in a more rapid pace. In Dallas alone, we're going to see the usage go from 1 to 4 gigawatts, and that's just from data center usage. So that's not including all the other secular things. So we don't know. All we know is the step function is massive, the demand is real, and we're dealing with credit tenants, so the banks are very, very comfortable coming into these projects.
Let me just add on that, just put it in perspective, and I appreciate the comment, we don't know, because we don't know, but we know it's coming, and it's just a matter of how much of it's real and the timing. But I just received an interesting statistic. The ERCOT interconnect process is a process where people start the process that they want to interconnect with the grid. And the latest stats I got last week is that we have in the interconnect queue 100 gigawatts of large load. That's up 20 gigawatts from January of this year. And so, we don't know whether it's real, but they are starting the process.
And here's the crazy math for these guys. When somebody believes they have power or the access to power, and then they want to have an interconnection because they're going to tap a gas line, and they know that the hyperscaler wants a path to utility power, there might be 5 people. So if Amazon says, I'm looking for a gigawatt, okay, and they're going to go to 4 different people, well, what you just got 4 different requests.
Right.
So for you guys, it's really tough because they have to divide by some number because it's never real. It's usually 5, okay? It could be 10. And so no one knows. And it's very difficult it's really difficult to manipulate your procurement, your capital needs, all the different things because until there's a signed lease, there's nothing.
One more comment and then turn it back over. Sorry, I don't mean to dominate, but just to put these numbers in perspective, because when I started on the ERCOT board, I had more of a midstream background, and some of the numbers, you don't know what they mean in reality. I mentioned 100 gigawatts in the interconnection queue. The all-time the entire ERCOT region, the all-time peak demand was in August of 2023, and it was 86 gigawatts. So we've got 100 gigawatts of large load in the interconnect queue. That kind of puts into perspective the potential growth we're talking about.
Crazy. Yeah, that's a tough job to figure all that out. So,
Peggy, what specific initiatives are underway to meet the Permian's needs right now?
Okay, there are a lot of initiatives underway. First of all, I think if there's any place that you get this done, it's going to be Texas. We are just our regulatory environment. We can build transmission in 3 to 5 years, which sounds like a long time, but it's like 7 to 12 in the rest of the United States. We've got some initiatives to build transmission into the Permian Basin, including upgrading the system to 765 kV, which would be the first time in Texas, and the PUC has to rule on that in April. They're going to make a ruling on that. We're doing, we've got the Texas Energy Fund, where $5 billion has been allocated to incentivize natural gas facilities. We're doing a demand response program at ERCOT now to try to put mechanisms in place where consumers can automatically give back to the grid, because we are in a challenging time the next few years. And so all these initiatives need to work together, and we need all of the above as far as generation.
Moving on, Jere, what is driving this growth in expected power usage in the Permian? And how big of a concern is this growth outlook for Diamondback?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I stated earlier, it's in my mind, it's electrification of the field as well as potential data centers coming into the basin. For Diamondback today, we use roughly 300 megawatts. About 75 of that is behind the meter. And what that means is that we're actually building out Diamondback owned and operated microgrids through our production fields. And so that's supplying the electricity that we need that potentially Encore isn't able to get to for certain parts of our production fields or what have you. And so on a go-forward basis, we expect that usage to double. So we're going to be at roughly 600 megawatts. Again, this is based off of drilling, let's call it 500 wells a year. And on a go-forward basis, there's lots of opportunities for us to continue to connect to the grid. I think, we're probably going to be in a position where half to 2/3 of our electricity comes from the grid. But we also need to continue to build out these microgrids to be able to get power where we need it, when we need it. And we do have a couple of projects in place that maybe are a little longer dated in nature. But in the meantime, we are trying to bring in a large IPP and build a significant, let's call it gig to 1.5 gig behind the meter CCGT plant, which, ideally you bring in a data center as a partner there, takes 75 to 80% of the load. We take the remainder. But it solves two big problems for us. One, nat gas egress. We're trying to find creative ways to, instead of move that nat gas down to the coast and be subject to the Waha basis differential, which unfortunately we've had to pay people to take our gas in some situations over the past couple of years. We're able to use that gas in basin, bypass that Waha basis, and realize a higher dollar amount for that nat gas. But on the back end, today roughly $1.20 per barrel is spent on electricity. And when you think about us producing 900,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day, that equates to about $400 million a year today. And so, that's pushing $1 billion in 2030. So anything that we can do to mitigate potential inflation on that piece of the cost curve, we're going to try. And we think, bringing in a large behind-the-meter plant is something that, could allow us to do that and ultimately mitigate that cost inflation into the future.
Awesome.
Graham, on the more broad scale, not just Diamondback specific, how do you expect this behind-the-meter trend to continue?
I think it's gonna grow. We've seen it grow significantly the last 10 years, and there's really we think it's going to be driven by several things. One is that being able to manage your own power and not have to rely fully on the utilities to bring your projects online. That's really what we refer to as time to power. When you're doing it yourself, you're typically realizing a much faster time to power. And we think that's a really big tailwind that's going to drive demand, because it's just frankly it's a better value proposition. If you've just drilled a $10 million well or you brought on a $200 million gas plant, you want to realize the profits and start realizing the net present value of that project as fast as you can, and waiting multiple years for the grid to get there to bring in highline power is really not always the most economic decision. And so that's been a big tailwind for the last decade. It's certainly coming to light in all the articles and news that you see today. And then also, some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace is that, the cost of electricity in Texas is up very materially the last 5 years. There's really several different rate structures in Texas. Retail, regular consumers pay one rate, and then commercial and industrial customers pay different lower rates. Just to sort of speak to the retail rates, call it 5 years ago in 2019, customers were paying 8 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour on average, and today you're 15, 16, 17 cents per kilowatt hour. And so we think this is really a pretty big problem, right? And so really the theme that we see is what we call convergence, where the cost of making electricity on site and eliminating a lot of the transmission, the wires, the substations that cost a fortune to maintain and that are very aged in the United States, simply eliminating a lot of that in-between cost, making your power on site really is a better solution. And I would, one example I would point to for this audience and crowd is one of the best long-term natural gas microgrid projects that we can point to in the country is actually right here at the University of Texas, right? Believe it or not, this campus runs completely independent of the grid, right? There is a 138 megawatt natural gas power station that distributes power to all the facilities here at this campus. And it's been doing this for 40 years, okay? And it's really interesting when you just read what's on the website, right? What did the university state? It's actually better for us to make our own power than it is to procure it from the grid, okay? Well, that's a very interesting thing. And so I would just say, if you don't understand anything about distributed power generation or behind-the-meter power, look no further than just these facilities in this campus right here, because this is a wonderful case study of how it can be done economically. And I can tell you that this university has avoided a tremendous amount of cost increases that, from these regulated utilities that we have here in the state, they've avoided a lot of cost over time, right? And so, again, we think the market needs more of this type of a solution versus less. The grid does great things for certain components of the economy, but not all components of the economy, right? So, yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Dave, this is a fairly broad question, and we've touched on it a little bit already, so feel free to take this wherever. But what is attracting developers to the Permian?
Well, I think Peggy said it. It's really difficult to build data centers. The regulatory environment in most places is very challenging. So for starters, the regulatory environment is very attractive. But probably the biggest attraction is the fact that there's an abundance of cheap gas. And so over time, the evolution of the customer demand is we had to pull from two different independent power sources was early stage. Recently, I'll start with some behind the meter, but I have to see a path to utility power. Today, we're starting to see people say, I can go with behind the meter, and I could possibly back up with behind the meter. And so, and skip the whole air permits and deal with the diesel permits and things of that nature. So in that particular capacity, as we're looking at massive multi-gigawatt campuses, there's not a lot of places you could do that. Also, gas is reliable. People talk about nuclear. We think that would be wonderful. We think we're 10 to 15 years away from being able to see small modular reactors actually work. They still have never seen any, we certainly haven't seen them work at scale. So everybody loves that idea. We'll see what ultimately happens in, 3 Mile Island or whatever happens in Susquehanna at the Talon site, if they can ever get that released to Amazon. But nuclear is a question mark, and there's a lot of technology going into proving it up, but the regulatory environment's not there yet. And the customer does not consider that to be sustainable. It does solve a carbon issue. It does not solve a sustainability problem. So Lots of different things, but scale, cheap gas, and the regulatory environment. As long as the regulatory environment doesn't change, and we're at risk right now of it changing. So we need to make a few tweaks to what's out there. And if that does tweak what's in the House, what's going to the House today, and it doesn't pass as is, we're good. If it does pass as is, I think the state of Texas is at risk.
Peggy, how is ERCOT and the state of Texas addressing the challenges and opportunities related to the increasing demand for power?
Well, this may be the legislation you're referring to. The legislature's in session now, and they are trying to grapple with all these issues. And there's some really important legislation that's being proposed, Senate Bill 6, that may be what you're referring to, which is going to have a big impact on all these issues, where we are very, compared to other grids, very quick to interconnect. The comparisons are remarkable how quick we are to do it.
Which, by the way, is probably the biggest driver.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we're continuing to focus on that. One of the interesting things about ERCOT is they have a lot of data and a lot of information, and we view a very important part of our role is to get that information out there, get it to the policymakers so that they can make informed decisions. So a lot of time is spent on getting that information to the policymakers who will make the important decisions.
Awesome. Graham, beyond traditional highline grid power that most of us are familiar with, what other sources of power generation are available, like mini grids, for example?
Yeah, so when we step away from highline power, you're really left with making power yourself. And as we know, power doesn't come from the line; it comes from a generation source, right? And so, like what we do at Baseline, for example, we do natural gas microgrids for customers, as well as other on-site solutions. So if you don't have highline, you're kind of just left to yourself, right? One of the most economic ways that we see to make power yourself is to utilize natural gas fuel. It checks a lot of the boxes around the emissions profile, the cost, the amount of time it takes to set it up. We think that a lot of those are just big value drivers for that. Outside of using natural gas, you can look at some other alternatives in the sort of liquid fuel space. You can use diesel fuel, you can use propane. And then you sort of step into some of the other, newer technologies out there like renewables, where you can set up small solar arrangements and pair those with batteries. Those are a much longer lead time to come in and construct. It's typically seen more as permanent infrastructure. And so that would really be close to the full suite of solutions that if you didn't have highline power, you could deploy relatively quickly, right? We think the natural gas solutions, again, coming back to the time to power thesis, that's gonna be one of your shortest times to power. Sometimes we can deploy those in a matter of days, a couple weeks, up to a month or two, depending on the size and scope of the project, and deliver affordable, reliable power to our customers in very, very short order. We think that drives a lot of value for their operations, especially operators who have drilling schedules where not exactly sure when I'm gonna drill these next 10 or 15 wells. And so if they're trying to hook up that well to the grid and they need power day one, there's kind of a mismatch there, right? And so our on-site natural gas solutions, we can deploy very fast and get them the power that they need just in short order so that they can start generating the return that they need on their investments.
I kind of want to open it back up to everyone, but how do we balance system reliability and the cost of power with all this demand growth and power coming up?
I've got a thought on that. I mean, I think generally when it comes to the long-term planning, kind of what we've seen in the regulatory, government landscape is people are thinking about sustainability, they're thinking about affordability, and they're thinking about reliability, right? And I think what's kind of led here in North America the last 5 years, it seems to be somewhat of a fading theme, is just the idea that sustainability drives everything from an investment perspective, right? And Okay, that's fine, right? We want to decarbonize. It's not a bad thing. It's just that that comes with certain costs, right? And as we think about maybe the next couple decades of Texas and North America and power planning, I think that we need to have a big focus on affordability and reliability, and maybe a little bit less so on sustainability. I think that's kind of taken a bit too big of a piece of the pie in terms of what people are focused on, because it's having real implications for businesses and consumers. One of my personal fears is that here in Texas, people say we're a deregulated market, and I think that's like kind of true. It sort of is on like the power gen side. It's much less so on the transmission and distribution side, where you have a couple large monopolies that really dominate the market and kind of have this perpetual put option to slam maintenance costs and everything back to businesses and back to the rate base whenever they want. And unfortunately, we kind of exist in an anti-competitive environment when it comes to our regulatory environment for the transmission and distribution companies, right? And I think that's a really big problem for Texas long term, because we've seen power prices go up, depending on the rates you're looking at, somewhere between 50 and 100% over the last 5 years. And if that trend continues, look, one of the things that has made Texas great is the fact that we have pretty affordable power here, right? But if we let the T&D companies just continue to put all their costs back to the rate base, right, which these big projects are wonderful, they just cost a lot of money. The wires, the substations, all the stuff in between is massively expensive, right? We are going to not be this really cost competitive energy environment in 5 to 10 years. That's a big fear of mine, right? That's kind of why we think distributed generation is a great solution. Do more of it yourself, do more of it on site, right? You cut out all the wires, all the substations, all the CapEx and maintenance that consumes a lot of dollars over time to maintain.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, that's part of the rationale behind us going behind the meter with kind of this larger 1 gig plus project, is even though the cost of building a new CCGT plant is continually increasing, I feel like every month the cost of turbines is higher and higher and higher, we are able to balance that capitalized cost that will ultimately be pushed onto us and potentially a hyperscaler, through the idea that we're not going to have to pay T&D. And so that mitigates that cost inflection that you're seeing through the build out, and is something that we're very focused on a go-forward basis.
Dave, you mentioned the key regulatory issues in the bill coming up. Do you mind expanding on that and the ramifications it could have on Texas?
Without getting into the 10 items that are being gently addressing, we're trying to gently address 10 items in the bill. I will say this, that Texas has been, first of all, the interconnection has been the biggest driver, but Texas has been a fantastic place for hyperscalers to come for lots of different reasons. SB 6 is totally important, and I think all the off-takers and users understand what everyone's trying to accomplish. I think the challenge that the hyperscalers or the developers are going to have is, if we think about these projects and we have to add months and years to the projects to go through requirements, it's going to it's going to force people to look elsewhere. I don't know where that elsewhere is. Georgia's not bad, but Texas is great. And I think there's some minor things we can do without getting into the granularities, because there are letters going out to people today, to gently tweak the bill to help the developers and primarily the credit. We need investment grade credit to come in to this sector. The capital will not come in unless there's investment grade capital tenants signing these, and they cannot come in if it gets challenging to do what we need to do in Texas. So there's a few things. There's 10 items that we will want. Well, I don't want to get into the items, but I will say that I think we are very confident that this could accomplish everything the state is looking to accomplish, without damaging our ability to recruit the hyperscalers to Texas. The magnitude of capital we're talking, there will be, before a single technology device comes into Abilene, there will be somewhere between $16 and $18 billion put into the ground, and that's for an empty data center. So You multiply that times all of the things we're talking about in the state of Texas, and we have 1,500 people on site every single day in Abilene. I don't know of any project like that that's ever been around Abilene, but these are incredibly economically advantageous projects that could come all over the state of Texas in places that have not seen this kind of investment. And so, gentle, there's 10 things we're looking at. We're hoping to make some minor changes, very minor, because I think the bill's important. The state has an obligation to protect, the state, but I think there's a way to get it done. And without getting into granularities, I'd say that we're super optimistic that we can make that happen and keep Texas the single place where people are looking to do this.
As a follow-up to that, if and when these data centers get built in the Permian Basin, what do you envision the Permian Basin looking like in 30, 40, 50 years?
So right now, if you take all the data centers in North America and you add them up, and you take that number and you multiply it by 4, you get Ashburn, you get Northern Virginia. That's how critical Northern Virginia is to the United States, or to the data center world, largest in the world. We believe West Texas will look like Ashburn, Virginia.
Wow.
Jere, I'm just wondering what opportunities you're seeing in the current energy landscape for Diamondback moving forward.
Yeah, so, we're an oil and gas producer. That's our bread and butter. That's what we do best. But, as we move forward, we're always looking for, additional legs that you can add to the stool. And power gen is one of them. I don't think we'll ever be the sole builder and operator of power plants, but I think, we have the ability to offer cheap natural gas. We have the ability to offer, quite a few service locations. We have 65,000 acres of surface, not as much as our friends at Landbridge, but still a significant amount. 30,000 of which is in a contiguous block right south of Midland. So when you think about data center development and large-scale projects, we're thinking, roughly 1,000 acres, give or take, for a gig-sized project. So take Bryant Ranch, you could have 30 gigs right there, 15, 30 minutes south of Midland. So that's really exciting. We're also looking at some nuclear opportunities as well. We're all of the above energy policy as it relates to the electrification of our fields. I think that is, again, a little bit of a longer lead time, but we announced a partnership with Oklo, which is modular nuclear reactors that can be put in different areas of, basically high productivity for us. And then we've had conversations with a lot of other modular producers that are looking to get, frankly, just out of the gates. So I think there's opportunities for us to use our investment-grade balance sheet to make investments alongside some of these subject matter experts. I don't think it'll ever be our core business, but it's certainly exciting, and I think the Permian Basin is, an incredible place to really jumpstart some of these new technologies, and ultimately, we're excited to be partners with a lot of these different companies doing some really unique things.
Then broadly speaking, where do each of y'all see opportunity in the current landscape of energy?
Everywhere. Everywhere. Love this distributed energy. We need the gas-fired generation. We need, the power and solar, which can be kind of, in today's environment, viewed as the bad guys. They have saved us, and they continue to save us, and the batteries have come on in a big way. So we need all of it, and there is so much opportunity. We need so many smart people in the industry. At ERCOT, we are hiring. We've got a lot of really smart people there, but we need more, and so there's so much opportunity. I got 3 daughters that are engineers, and they're all in energy in one way or another, and it's like there is so much opportunity, more than I've ever seen in my entire career in energy right now, and the landscape is fundamentally changing.
Data centers don't work without power. So last I checked, we're projected to grow at pretty amazing rates. And we need energy. And what's interesting is what we've learned is that people in the data center world Power is a foreign language. And people in the power world, as we've worked on joint ventures, data centers are a foreign language. And so while we are really just resellers of power, by the way, data centers we price our contracts, our leases, by the megawatt or the kilowatt. It's really about the kilowatt. People from the real estate world say, well, what do you charge per square foot? And, we look at them as though like they're speaking, some foreign language from another planet. So the worlds are colliding together, but there is no overlap. And so we depend on the energy, the world to help us. We hire energy people now. We're hiring teams and teams and teams of energy experts because so there's enormous opportunities in the data center world to be on the energy teams that have to interface with the energy providers, because we're always going to be the consumer and not the producer.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead,
I
please.
was just going to say, Diamondback specifically, we produce 2 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas. And right now, that makes up about 5% of our revenue. So, I think over time, we expect that percentage to grow, and we're really excited about the opportunity to not just, push this to the coast, but ultimately find in-basin solutions where, we have the ability to, A, better what we're doing operationally, but B, continue to realize more for that production stream and fuel a lot of the growth that we expect in the Permian.
For the students in the room, I was just wondering if we could have a brief background of how you got to where you are today in your leadership role. So maybe, Graham, we can start with you there.
Yeah, sure. So education-wise, I went to SMU for undergrad, TCU for grad school. Kind of grew up in an oil and gas family, spent time in production operations in the summertime a lot. And then after I went to college, spent some time working for an investment bank, and then went to real estate. And then when I was doing my MBA, I had some great internships, and I think that those were really helpful for me. Spent a short time up in New York doing energy investment banking, and worked on some service businesses. And that's really, at the end of my MBA, realized that I thought doing something entrepreneurially was better for me. And so I was 28 at the time and started the business that I run today. And that was back in 2012. And so I took a bit more of the entrepreneurial route, I guess, and haven't really worked at a whole lot of big companies for super long. But yeah, that's kind of my journey, I guess, to where I got.
So I'm a lawyer by education. I actually started at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, worked there for 2 years right out of law school, then moved to Houston, went to a large corporation, worked my way up to be general counsel of a Fortune 50 energy company. Then I took the unusual step of going to be a partner at a law firm, and been on 3 public company boards, several private boards. I'm currently vice chair of ERCOT and advisory board member for Whitewater, some of the Whitewater affiliates. So a very unusual track that I could not have planned out from the beginning, but it's been open to opportunities, and it's worked out well for me.
I'm an entrepreneur, got a business degree from the Midwest. Started a telecom company, quite frankly, right after divestiture. Wound up growing that business went public through M&A, grew it to a certain size and sold it to a company down here in Austin in 1998. What's interesting is data centers really are interconnection ports, just like cell towers are. We're nodes on a network. So I learned about the network. I realized that, I thought the next great thing was going to be being the larger node on the network instead of a tower. So I started a data center company called Cyrus One. Ran that company. We also went the public route. And I went to the board when we went public because we became a public real estate investment trust, and that was a foreign language to me as well. But I became a student, and I stayed on that board for a few years, and wound up going back into the CEO role after some changes we needed to make. Did a take private of that business, which we finished in 2023. Cyrus One's international business, about the third largest platform in the world. Stayed on that board, and then recently joined a couple colleagues of mine with the same tenure in the industry. One started Digital Realty, which is the largest platform in the world, second largest market cap, public. And we started Primary Digital. And so we're taking a little bit of a different angle, kind of a ultimate private REIT to public REIT potential path, bringing capital to a lot of these unfunded, massive unfunded development projects that all of the largest platforms have. And the challenge right now in the data center space is not just power, but it's capital. They're expected to, spend $1 trillion in the next 5 years. And that's just in North America. So we're hoping to usher in capital. That's what we're doing while working with all of our old peers, both on new projects and on funding, stabilized assets. So entrepreneur, and just kind of followed the network to the data center, and I've been hanging around the data center for 25 years.
So I came on the 40 acres in 2006 as a history major, and I remember going to my advisor at the end of my freshman year. She said, well, Jere, you had some AP credits, whatever, congratulations, you can graduate next summer. And I said, well, I don't want to be on the 40 acres for 2 years, I want to be here for 4. So got into the business school.
No one gave me that.
Yeah. I think it was $3,000 a semester back then. I don't know what it is now, but anyways, so double majored in history and finance. Ironically enough, my worst subject was accounting. Don't tell our board, but somehow it all worked out. Went into banking in the summer of 2010. Was in banking for 2 years, but it was right at the beginning of the horizontal shale revolution. Was in Dallas and frankly had a bunch of clients in Midland and said, this looks really fun. I was single at the time, had no strings, moved out to Midland, didn't have anywhere to stay, so it was basically couch hopping this summer of 2012, had my closet in the back of my car, and the only thing, I had a laundry bag and I would just drop it off at the dry cleaners. But the moral of the story is I took a risk and I went out to Midland, didn't know anybody, but I knew that what we were doing in the Permian Basin was special. Was able to get a job, worked with Concho for 9 years. We sold to ConocoPhillips in January of 2021, which was honestly at the trough of kind of the energy space coming out of COVID. Crude was still, $40, $50 a barrel, and I really believed in the business model. I believed in what we were trying to do in the space. It was much more of a return of capital, maintain production mode than, I guess the term that gets thrown around a lot is drill baby drill, where you're just outspinning cash flow and basically trying to hit certain growth rates. And I said, this new model makes sense. I think shareholders are really gonna love it, and I think there's a lot of value to be created. So fortunately enough for me, I got to walk across the street from Concho to Diamondback in this, I guess, spring of 21, and I didn't even really have a role. I just said, look, I believe in what you're trying to do. I believe in low-cost operations. I believe in your asset base. Just let me come in and try to add value. And they let me. I had 0 direct reports, really no responsibilities. It was just, what can I do without stepping on people's toes? I think I was able to navigate that tightrope a little bit. And then, fast forward 4 years later, fortunate enough to be named CFO in February of this year. As of Monday, we were a $65 billion company. I think today we're closer to 35 or 40. So it's been a hell of a week. But, I'm super excited about what the future holds for Diamondback and for the industry, and, very excited to partner with folks outside of core, oil and gas production, and again, do some stuff that I think will really be transformative, for the United States as a whole.
I love this story. Somebody that, really took a risk with leaving Concho. I'm sure you could have done a number of different things, and you approached the company, believed in it. They took a risk on you, and 4 years later, you're the CFO. That's an amazing story.
I will say having a supportive spouse is incredibly important. We're from Dallas, and I told her when we got engaged we'd be in Midland 2 years. At that point, it had been well north of that, and she was willing to stick around for another 4. And that obviously was huge for my career, but you can't do it without the support of the people around you.
Going off that, for what skill sets or attributes would you say are most important that you see every day that you would advise college students to gain or hone their skills on?
For me, it was writing. When I started at Concho, it was a similar story. We were growing, and I was part of the IR team, and I noticed some things in the press releases and in the conference call scripts that we put out that I thought kind of were grammatically a little funky. Said, well, hey, can I take a shot at being kind of the public voice of the company? And so I said, sure, see how this goes. And fortunately enough, it worked out. And when I went to Diamondback, it was kind of a similar story, where it's just like, let me be your voice through written communication. And so, I wasn't an English major. I do have a liberal arts background, but the ability to communicate to me is so important. And I think today, that written skill is something that's really undervalued.
I think that one really important skill is learn how to ask questions. Some people are nervous about admitting when they don't know something. And I think it's the greatest strength you can have because nobody knows everything. And so when you learn how to ask questions, you get to the facts really quickly. And you shouldn't be afraid of it. You should be proud to know how to ask questions, spend time writing questions. My mom said something to me because I was kind of loud back in the day as the middle child. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Can you use them that way? And so I've just found people who ask questions get answers quicker, be curious, ask a lot of questions, and you'll learn a lot.
I agree with asking questions, but I want to also weigh in on the communication. I see it a lot because I deal with a lot of engineers. We got a lot of PhDs at ERCOT, economists, engineers, so many acronyms that I thought midstream was bad in acronyms. It's nothing compared to power. You have to be able to be effective. The most effective people are people that can take complex issues and break it down simply in both writing and in communication, verbal communication. And it's something I think is not stressed enough in schools. So there's so many, I mentioned I have 3 daughters that are engineers. I know so many engineers that are brilliant but can't communicate to people. And so really focusing on that it's a critical skill.
Yeah, I would say 3 things that stick out to me. One would be curiosity, for sure, and just be the person that's sort of like willing to pick at the scab and just like, okay, that doesn't seem right. Like, just keep going after it. How could that be better, And that was like a little bit of our story at Baseline in the early years, is just we saw people like burning all this diesel fuel with generators. We're like, this makes 0 sense, And so, like we converted the whole marketplace like to using natural gas within just a couple years, So I think like having curiosity is really important. Second would be what I would just call like stick-with-itness, and just like having just ability to really get through, like obviously good times aren't hard, right? But it's like we all get tested. The fractures come when things get really challenging, And so stick-with-itness is huge. And then third would just be like character, And I think that's a really big one. A lot of educational institutions, like high schools, colleges, whatever, they're there to kind of like make you smarter as a person and like have intelligence, which is great, but really like, wholesome people that like do really well long term, just in their personal lives and business lives, are tend to be people who are really smart and have high character. So like, don't ever forget those two things in combination, right? And so, yeah, that would be my answer there.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much.
How about some recognition for our panelists and our moderators?